I think the most interesting projects, like we're doing a couple things in Chinatown, for example. And Chinatown is not only personally very close to home, but doesn't have a lot of power in a way. It's a very low income neighborhood. It's surrounded by all these much more wealthy neighborhoods, and it's under all this pressure to change or to gentrify, basically. But there's also obviously such a historic or interesting culture within Chinatown, multi generational. So being able to make physically almost an emblem to give that neighborhood more power is for me, like a really interesting way to approach work. And I think in a place like New York where power is so important, I think money is so important, political power is so important, cultural power is so important that I think architecture can at least influence the cultural power of things.
Welcome to Creative Coordinates, a podcasting highlighting the thinkers, makers, and doers from the WSA community. In each episode, we sit down with voices who are influencing culture, building bold ideas, and moving the world forward. Today's guest is Dong-Ping Wong, founder of the architecture and design studio Food. Dong's work spans buildings, installations, public projects, and experimental concepts, all unified by a drive to make design more joyful, more accessible, and more inclusive. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad this worked out.
Yeah. Short notice, but New York, that's the beauty of
I could walk here. It's great.
Let's start off just with a kind of high level. How do you describe the creative work that you're doing?
I say that I'm an architect. Usually the immediate follow-up question is, what kind of architecture do you do? And I don't know how to answer that question well. In a way that I think it's detrimental to our business, to be honest. But it's because I think all our projects are pretty varied and it spans a pretty wide range of things. But basically, we're an architecture firm. We do cultural work. That's not really cultural work. And about half our work is within New York City, oftentimes within walking distance from where we are. So we're based in Chinatown. And then the other half is everywhere else, basically. Right now, we're doing a couple projects on the beach, so I'm pretty happy about that. But we're architects. That's probably the most straightforward way.
And having one foot in architecture and one foot in culture, is that something that you think most of the clients or people you work with truly understand, or does it really take a lot of explaining to get them to understand the...
I actually think I've gotten to a place now where the clients that approach us are also there. They're usually 1 foot in. I actually never thought of us as 1 foot in culture, 1 foot in architecture, but from that model, I'd say they're always 1 foot in whatever industry they're in, and then also trying to push culturally through that industry, usually their own culture, their own community, their version of what culture means to them. So there's a good alignment, more than it was 5 years ago, let's say 5-6 years ago.
And now that you've kind of established the brand and people have seen the types of work you're doing and you get an inbound inquiry, are people saying, I want this project to look like that, or they're more entrusting you to be the creative genius behind?
Less than I would have thought, actually. We don't get a lot of clients or potential clients that are saying, I want the version of this project. I think that's actually where maybe it helps that our projects all look quite different, and we don't really have a really uniform style. Clients will come and say they really loved XYZ, but rarely does a client say they want exactly what we did before.
And ultimately, when you get involved with a project and it comes to life and it manifests into a physical form piece of real estate, how do you even look at, is a project successful, and how do you determine that as a creative?
You know, you're obviously, I think as an architect or as a creative, as you're going through, let's say, months and months and months of construction process, you're seeing all of the little faults, all little details are not built right. So success technically is oftentimes how many of those are done really well, and the detailing and the materiality. I think larger is just as dumb as it is the client happy? And then even more so is the guest that the client is building this for, are they happy? Are they enjoying it? Garden Club, for example, is a great example where I'm seeing people enjoy it in a way that I never planned to see or expected. People seem to really embrace it. So I think when it gets to the point where people are loving it even beyond what you'd planned for, that's great.
And Garden Club is at Palm Heights.
Yeah, sorry, Garden Club.
Yeah, we could touch on that. Unintentional, but that's definitely something that was one of the reasons that we got to know each other here. But maybe just give a little bit of color on Garden Club, your involvement there, Palm Heights.
So Palm Heights is a hotel down in Grand Cayman, in the kind of world or family of the WSA world. And the Garden Club is a freestanding bathhouse project that we worked on with them that just opened, I think at this point, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago or so. But it's basically a large garden that has a bunch of pools and spas and saunas, as well as a big gym next to it. Um, and it's kind of both an amenity of the hotel, but also I think, a standalone, unique thing down there.
And what was interesting is it was a mix of both local members and hotel
Oh, was it?
guests.
Oh, that's nice to
Yeah,
hear.
that was cool.
That's
And so
cool.
you go there, typically when you see hotel guests, they don't always look
Yeah.
like, everyday perfect specimens, but it was a good mixture of users
That's
when I
cool.
saw it.
I was very curious whether people that live on the island would be repeated users or not, and then, of course, how you would use it once you go every day or every week. But I'll have to go down there and see for myself.
And the reviews that the hotel is getting, it hits on so many fronts. So having a great spa
Yes.
and experience there is pretty amazing.
Yeah, press. I think positive press around a project is always very validating. That's usually the first thing you'll get. Even just the photos that come out, if they're done really well, are validating. But those first reviews are always helpful. The client obviously likes them because oftentimes it's good for marketing. And usually those images or those press pieces oftentimes are that travel further than anything else on the project. So that's always great.
We were joking that when you go on a vacation, a lot of people will hope that they get a lot of workouts in, and maybe you start out the first day and then you go out that night and
Yeah.
you sleep in, you don't, whatever. But I said it was one of the few places that I've been able for a full week to go every single day. So it's both a testament to the design and creativity that you brought, and then the usability and
Thank
the
you.
experience itself.
It's also, I think it's just, you're just sweaty down there anyway in Cayman. So you might as well be working out and embracing it.
And it's the indoor and outdoor
Yeah,
workout,
yeah,
which
yeah.
was cool. So you named your firm Food. The origin was family.
Mhm.
So if you don't have to touch on family, but the name, the origin of your firm would be interesting to hear about, from family to food.
Sure. The dumbest answer is I just love food. And at the time, actually, for both offices, I wanted a name that was kind of stupid. I think classically, architecture firms are either named after the principal or they have a kind of very intelligent name, and I didn't want that. And how it actually came about was I'm like a serial name changer, and I was with an ex of mine at a Thai restaurant, and I was reading off the menu on the wall, like pad Thai, could that work for a name? Like ice cream, could that work for a name? And she was so frustrated that she'd basically just said, fucking just name it food. And it was such an absurd name that I laughed about it for 2 weeks, and then it was funny enough where it actually stuck. I think since then it's actually been nice that even how we start projects with people is like we get meals first. If we don't connect over food, it's a good sign we may not connect that well on the project. So there's all these kind of, like, from there was all these layers around why the name made sense, but the original name was just, honestly, it sounded funny and made me really happy.
And then what was the predecessor name? Family, similar type of story?
Family, I think, was actually a little bit more, I don't know if pretentious is the right word, but it was, I think, starting an office at the time, it was with a business partner. I think there was this kind of idealism of, oh, we're going to be a big design family. And then you sort of realize it's not quite how it works. But that one led into, I just want a simple, I guess in that part, just a kind of a single syllable kind of name moving forward. So that worked out well. But family, I think, had larger sort of how the office will feel goals. And food, I think, was I just wanted something that was more visceral.
And being able to eat a meal with a potential new client.
Yes.
I would ask you, what makes a good client for you?
Who makes a good client? I guess I could say this in terms of the clients I have the most enjoyment working with, are the ones I think that have a really, if not necessarily a clear idea of what they want architecturally, they have a really clear idea of the kind of effect or transformation they want to see, again, either within their industry or even globally. And then obviously it's our job to work together to figure out physically what that looks like. It's much easier, I think, or much more fun anyway, when ideas are bouncing back and forth really directly. A lot of the clients will just be on a WhatsApp channel nonstop, as opposed to much more formal, kind of like 2-week presentation and review process. So I think those kind of clients I really enjoy. There's as much energy on the client side, on the creative side, as there is on our side.
And like a term like creative freedom, what does that mean to you?
I actually just have it. So in architecture, it's a little funny. So maybe I'll back up a little. One of the reasons I got into architecture originally was I really liked to draw as a kid, but I knew that I didn't have um, the self drive, I guess, to be an artist. Like I needed someone to tell me what to do, and then I could respond to it. So architecturally, creative freedom is, I think it's you're able to come up with ideas, but within a really specific constraint, like box of like a framework, basically, and whether that's client given, whether that's legal, whether that's code based. But I think again, I think that the clients that I like to work with the most don't really come with an aesthetic or a formal desire. Um, they come with, oh, I really want to empower a certain group of people, or I really want to kind of shock this neighborhood that we're going into, and then the creativity is pretty open ended on how we achieve that.
Do you think clients have an easier time giving you reference points today just with the
Yes,
digitization of
for
the
sure.
world?
Yeah. There's always a moment where people pull up their Instagram feeds or their saved posts or whatever it is, and there's a smattering of kind of material or color suggestions like that.
And I'm sure there's some psychology in when you get that inbound design direction to really talk some sense into them as to what
Yeah,
could make sense.
you have to be a little polite sometimes because you can't just straight up say these are terrible ideas. Oftentimes they're actually not. Usually they're actually really interesting. I think what I try to do is take that and find the more like specific or precise or unique version of that that seems geared towards what their intent is as opposed to what they like aesthetically like. But I will say I've been noticing people's kind of level of design language has accelerated a lot over the last decade. I think probably because of Instagram and because of the access to all this imagery.
And in my research, the whole I say it as plus pool.
That's correct.
Right,
Yeah.
plus pool. It looks that way. I just want to make sure. But plus pool is definitely a public facing recognizable project.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of dovetail into what you were just explaining about how you like to work, what was the framework for kind of ideating that project?
So Plus Pool is unique in that it was totally my random creation. And it was, I had an office, which is to say I had a name and a website, but didn't really have any work. But I wanted to do large civic scale work. It was a lot of where my training was, but you obviously don't get offered a project like Plus Pool right away, if at all. And so I was like, well, I know how to make really nice images. I know how to design well. Let me just throw it out there and see what happens. So that one worked almost backwards from almost any other design process where the idea and the final design in a way almost came first. And then you built, I found the team around it. Eventually you find a site around it. You find financial partners around it. You find an organization to support it. And you kind of back your way into all of the infrastructure that's usually in place before a design ever hits the table. So in a way, I think in some ways that was like, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but kind of one of the most pure ideation processes because it was like, oh, I'm in the shower, I had an idea, let me just sketch it out, and it worked, and just kind of kept going from there.
And do you feel like the development timeline that you'd have to go through doing that inverse relationship
Much longer
is for the few?
Is not efficient.
No.
That project is now, I think, coming into its 15th year. I remember when we first started, we were talking to the guys that started the Highline because they had a similar thing where they were like neighborhood guys that had this idea. And they were like, the Highline took us a decade. And I remember laughing, like, we'll do it in 5, if that. But part of it was what we were doing. Not only had it never been done before, but it was starting to push up against all these laws that the city had around what a swimming pool was, what swimming in open water was. And so with the big team, we actually had to figure out not only ways around it, but working with the city to write new laws in a sense. So that stuff was never anticipated from the beginning of the project. But yeah, that process, unless you're backed by a ton of money right off the bat, is a much slower.
And when you run a business like yours, and you're creative, it's good to have a mixture of long tail and shorter duration project.
Especially like an initiative project like that is not making you money anytime soon. It's more akin to coming up with a product. I think you do all this R&D, you test it, and eventually you sell it. But at a scale of architecture, that sale point is way down the road. And so even our office now, I'd say 80%, 75% of our work is relatively straightforward client-based. But ever since Plus Pool, it's been really important to have initiative stuff in the office, but now it's a much smaller scale, much faster
Have
turnaround.
other cities come to you, or?
Yeah. We were talking to Paris for a while. This was well before the Olympics. London, Berlin, Baltimore, of all places. Um, the focus was always try to do it in New York first, which is also maybe what's taken so long, because New York's a hard place to build something like this. But because it was home, and I think that the reason it picked up so much attention right off the bat is because I'd proposed it in New York. And I think New Yorkers just like talking about stuff that's in New York, and it's spread internationally really quickly.
Totally. I know we had a connection point through the new museum and our friend Karen. What's your kind of involvement with that museum, or maybe touch on kind of how you feel about that as an institution in New York?
Well, Karen, I think this is true, was my first real client ever, because New Museum had put out a competition to design these festival tents. They used to run a festival called Idea City that Karen kind of spearheaded. And my office won that the very first year, built it. Karen was basically like cracking the whip and making sure we stay on budget, but it was my first real client as an independent architect or designer. And then I think she basically took me under her wing, as she does with a lot of young designers. And still to this day, I'm calling her up for like advice and mentorship and things like that. So that's been really fortunate. It's actually really nice to connect back with her more properly, even through WSA, because it's nice that she's in this building sometimes too.
Yeah. And kind of when you work with a cultural institution like a museum, how do you kind of feel about that work and going into it, and then when it actually comes to life?
I never thought about this. It's not hugely different than working with, let's say, a commercial client or a residential client. Residential is different with a commercial client, let's say, in that ultimately it's the person or the group of people you're working with. It's always easiest when you're working with the main decision maker or the person who's either leading that organization, the brand, or whatever. A little harder when you're working with people that then have to push it back up to get decisions from a board or whatever it might be. So even from the cultural side, it wasn't that hard, or wasn't that different. You're always designing it for an audience that is not the client. Obviously museum goer, or let's say like a shopper or whatever it is. In the new museum's case, in the festival tents, it was really nice that I lived really close by the new museum at the time. And so it was a 2 blocks that we built on I passed by every day anyway. So that was really nice to be able to design something so familiar for a place so familiar. But I think I was also just used to working with cultural institutions from the previous work that I was doing.
You mentioned your team winning that project. Your team is kind of still operates very lean and mean.
Yes, I
Sounds
think at
like.
that point the team was like two people, maybe.
When you're kind of building an architectural business and
Yeah.
putting a team together in the way that you're approaching it, do you have to think about mixing and matching between creatives and very, let's say, execution focused people? Or how would you kind of explain the food
I think
team?
I learned this actually through my own experience working for other people. There was a moment where I was transitioning from a designer on a team to a project manager on a team on the same project, and I really struggled. And I wanted to basically just like head down design stuff, but I needed to obviously manage a team. And the boss at the time pulled me aside and asked, "Do you want to go back to being a designer?" And it wasn't like a demotion kind of thing. It was like, "I think you're more comfortable designing," but I knew that wasn't where I wanted to go. So I said no and kind of learned that skill set. And even now, I think we always try to pair on a team at least 2 people, one that's primarily on the managerial and communication and keeping on track, and the other side is almost pure design. I think being able to not worry about the managerial side of a project and just focus on the design side is a big luxury that we try to keep with all the projects.
And then do you kind of play on both sides as the leader?
Yeah, I kind of have to.
Yeah.
And I'm not nearly as invested in either, I guess, both purposely, but just at a time. But it also allows me to kind of take a little bit of a bird's eye view on the design, especially, and even on the management side, because it's obviously easy to get caught in the weeds and stuff like that. But my main job, besides kind of bringing in work, is being a direct contact with the client side and making sure the design is kind of guiding towards like the bigger principles that we set out with the client from the day one. But maybe from a creative freedom question is I do try to give the teams a lot of freedom to propose stuff and run stuff how they want.
And when you kind of look back at your career now, which spans almost 20 years plus,
Yeah.
right? What do you kind of see as the biggest deltas or differences from how the profession used to operate in the early 2000s to today?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So when I first started professionally, this was before I had an office, was before the 2008 housing crisis. And so that was a moment that I haven't really seen since, where there was so much money coming into construction, coming into architecture, coming into real estate. Cities like Dubai were basically getting invented in that moment, that the assumption was you could come out as a relatively young architect, work for a young architecture firm, and you were doing gigantic projects with virtually unlimited budgets. And that was the case up until basically halfway through 2007. And then you saw stuff starting to freeze and slow down. And I think that gave rise to, that's part of the reason I ended up doing something like Plus Pool, was like initiating stuff because there weren't clients around anymore. I think the biggest shift was basically at that point you could almost guarantee, or you could expect big money clients to be coming through the door all the time, without having to really do a ton of, let's say, promotion or marketing or put your own identity out there as much. Now I think it's so much more based on the personality of the principal and actually just kind of these personal relationships, and actually even the from an architecture role, kind of creating a project that you can then develop together with a client, let's say, and actually together putting the project together, which I think was less the case. Before, it was much more of a direct service you were providing, which seems actually in a lot of ways was much more straightforward. Now I think it's a lot more like there's a creative aspect to it, but it's almost like you're producing projects more than you were before.
And, real estate, I believe, is a people business.
Mm.
The decision makers want face-to-face contact. So
Mhm.
when you look at where we're at now versus maybe a few years ago where we had to do things remote, are you the type of person that likes to be front and center with your clients, at least if they're based close by?
Yeah, I feel like given a choice, I'm an introvert, so I like being able to just kind of like design on my own and sit off in a corner somewhere. But I'm also someone that really likes direct communication with a client. Even the name food was a lot of like when you have a meal together, I feel like you kind of start having conversations that are not purely about business, and getting to know each other, which is so important. So that part's super key, and actually part of the reason it's like so fun to do the work that I get to do.
And when you ultimately have someone walk in the door or the project starts to kick off for you, do you like to start with more of a sketching approach to creativity, or you dive right into the digital side?
No, we try to avoid digital for a while. And this was actually something I learned working with clients in the past, is that I would be hand sketching just for myself, just almost to take notes graphically. And then clients would really pick up on it and actually see something in those. Literally 5 minutes in, you'd start putting an idea on the table. And that actually informed how we work in the office, where as soon as a project starts, I'm trying to get people to put designs on the table on day one, just to kind of get intuitive ideas out. And then you look at those, observe, research back, and evolve that over a few weeks. But the digital, we try to keep it where the digital is primarily for documentation, or physically formalizing an idea. But it does feel like there's so much more fluidity working through hand, and whether it's sketching or we make a lot of hand models in the office, the feedback there is just so much better than even really basic digital
And you
tools.
probably have such an archive of all of these ideas, and
Yeah.
there's different ways, even of the analog stuff of saving it.
Yeah.
Do you ever go back into the folder to kind of trace some old ideas and bring them forward, or?
Not as much as I want to think we do. I mean, we keep archives for that reason, but we rarely look back. And I think partially it's because there's too much. And so I don't even remember where to look for an idea. We can pick up a binder randomly and flip through it, but it's not, I haven't archived it well enough to make it really active right now. It's just saving stuff.
We're getting there.
Yeah,
there.
we're getting
Sadly,
there.
on the good side of technology, that may be doable
True.
sooner
Yeah.
than we
To
think.
be able to search for stuff that way would be actually really nice.
And I even saw, I think in your your relationship or collaboration with Virgil Abloh was maybe something you sketched on a futuristic city, if I read
Yes.
that correctly.
Yeah. So this was for a conference in Cape Town, and the idea was I called him in. He was a day away, I think, from a Off-White show in Paris. And so the day before, I called him in, and we had a 15-minute, I don't know if it was Zoom or not, but a live Zoom on stage. And the idea was to design a city in 15 minutes. And so he talked, we talked, and I just sketched with a camera down on the piece of paper. And really, we just made a poster out of it, but it was actually a really fun thing to do. And that was actually what's interesting is that was actually born out of both with Virgil, and I met Virgil through work with Kanye between like 2012 and like 2018. We were working a lot together, and that fast sketching method was very much born from working with both of them because one, they work really fast, but also you needed to come up with an idea immediately. You couldn't be like, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks with something. And so the sketching really took hold in that era. And still, we still do that all the time in the office.
Yeah, live sketching is something that could be a business unto
Yeah,
itself,
yeah.
right? You could see a real creative.
For sure.
And
was
not
fun to
all
do.
creatives have to work so fast, but the ones that can, it's like it's put on display.
It's cool to
I'm
see
sure,
it
right?
kind of like reveal us. Even when I was sketching, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to draw.
Yeah.
So I was trying to listen and trying to draw at the same time.
And do you feel
turned
like
out well.
when you describe a great creative collaboration with someone like Virgil, is it in that case is you're just like you are so creative, you're driving the ship here, I'm going to work within, or you kind of it's almost like a tennis match where you're going back and forth?
It's like a tennis match, but then you realize the guy on the other side is really, really fucking good, and so you're trying to keep up. And sometimes you're keeping up, and sometimes you're influencing the match. Oftentimes, it's getting pushed in directions that they want to go in, which is exciting, especially with a talent like that. But I will give full credit to someone like Virgil, or Virgil specifically, actually, that he really valued almost everybody he worked with in terms of input and in terms of creativity. I think partially is he was working with so many people at once, like 100 projects at a time. But I think he'd bring you on board because he liked what you were doing already. So I think he was as curious about what you're doing as anything. Some of the clients are a little less so. You're really just sort of manifesting what you're hearing from that end. But I think with Virgil, it was much more back and forth.
And obviously, that's a great example of creative alignment. Have you ever been in a situation where there was misalignment?
Yeah, of course, all the time.
and how does that feel? How do you deal with misalignment when you run? You know, part of this show is also it's for up and coming
Sure.
people that run agencies or service firms.
Yeah.
When you have misalignment and you're doing creative work, what are best practices for dealing with that?
I think the two rules to keep in mind, well, I'm making these rules up as I'm saying out of my mouth. The two rules to keep in mind is it's their money. So ultimately, I want to make sure they're getting what they want. But at the same time, like usually there's a kind of personal investment in the work we're doing. Not only design-wise, but in the community we're working with or with whatever culture we're touching. And so when there is a disagreement, oftentimes it's more on what is the goal of this project as opposed to what does this project look like. And we always try to push on the client, and sometimes to a point of like we're arguing a lot. And whether we win or not, I think it's just helpful for us to know that we laid our cards on the table and we kind of explained what we thought was important. If the client doesn't believe in the same importance, it's fine. Like, you move on and you move on. I think we've been lucky that we haven't had a client where like politically we've been so far afield that there's no way to work through it. They're relatively small disagreements in the scheme of things, but there's also at some point you're like, okay, you swallow your pride a little, and there's an interesting design challenge in here. We're like, oh, this is not what I intended to do at all, but actually, how can we design this in a really interesting way that's both interesting to us and obviously keeps the client happy. But it's also why like the initiative work that we do is really important because it allows me, I should say, to figure out what's most important in our work without having to get approval from the person across the table.
And I know public spaces are important to you and designing for public spaces. And I saw, I think it was conceptual in Chinatown, kind of the observation deck.
The tower thing.
Yeah. That is not built, right?
That is not built, no.
Okay. I didn't want to embarrass myself in knowing that should be there. When you were thinking about just even the height, maybe explain that project a little bit and what you had in mind.
Sure.
And why you chose the height, in terms of visually to see over.
So that was a project that Department of Transportation put out an open call to redo. There's an information box on Canal and Baxter. The information box currently is just this little red box with like this funny golden dragon on it. And DOT was like, we want to make a new gateway for Chinatown. That's a really kind of like entry point into the neighborhood. I think off the bat, we knew that what they wanted was not what we wanted to do. My assumption was they wanted a kind of newly decorated version of that box. And so my approach was, let's not approach it with the assumption we're going to win. My guess is whatever they pick may not get built anyway, and that kind of is what happened. So what I wanted to do was something that was a little bit obnoxious, but mainly to really make a real marker, almost like an emblem for Chinatown that was taller than it needed to be. But the reason for the height was actually that I wanted people to get up into China, to be able to observe how Chinatown was related to Little Italy, Soho, financial district physically, and be able to place themselves within the city like that. Because when you're downtown, it's very easy to kind of get disoriented. And I think Chinatown was a place that people have not only physically or geographically so many confused ideas around, but just don't understand it that well. So that was the intent of bringing people up into the sky to understand Chinatown a little bit more.
Have you been up in the sky to observe down there in any of the taller buildings?
The closest one is actually there's a hotel on Bowery and Canal that you can look at. Unfortunately, I guess it faces away from Chinatown, the main kind of bar up there.
Yeah.
But it is nice to suddenly like remember you're kind of in the middle of the city.
Canal
like
is
that.
the one subway in Manhattan that I get off every single time, and it takes me a second or two to know
exactly
which direction I'm
which street to take. Yeah.
And I always feel like I'm not a real New Yorker because of that. So anything that could be done, hopefully that does get built one day or something.
I still like that project a lot.
Right? When you think of like kind of the role an architect plays in a city like New York, I would say we have a big New York City audience here. How do you think in those terms of your responsibility both to your own business and practice, but also to the citizens and the tourists and the city itself?
So that's actually shifted in the last few years, I'd say. I think originally, as I was learning how to get stuff built, it was really how do you just make really beautiful work that provides a little bit of a public service of some kind, even if it was a commercial project. But how do you do something unique? How do you do something that's going to stand out? Now, I think, and it's because we're doing larger scale projects and we're dealing with a lot more of the kind of politics within the city. I think I've been seeing architecture as a way to basically create power in a way that's really fascinating to me. So like you're concretizing power, basically. You're kind of physicalizing either existing power structure or you're kind of trying to find ways to materialize new forms of power. It's always much more interesting when it's like new forms of power. And so I think the most interesting projects, like we're doing a couple things in Chinatown, for example. And Chinatown is not only personally very close to home, but doesn't have a lot of power in a way. It's a very low income neighborhood. It's surrounded by all these much more wealthy neighborhoods, and it's under all this pressure to change or to gentrify, basically. But there's also obviously such a historic or interesting culture within Chinatown, multi-generational. So being able to make physically almost an emblem to give that neighborhood more power is for me, like a really interesting way to approach work. And I think in a place like New York where power is so important, I think money is so important, political power is so important, cultural power is so important that I think architecture can at least influence the cultural power of things. So I'm trying to work with a lot more institutions and organizations that also are playing in that kind of realm.
And when you also think about redesign versus new development, how do you see the world through those two lenses? And I'll ask you maybe even to make it a little bit, and I'm sure you can answer any question, but just maybe one other way to ask it. When you look around Chinatown or Lower Manhattan and you think about a building or an area that you'd love to redesign because the way it's operating maybe needs some type of positive update, what comes to mind?
I mean, right where our office is at the intersection where the bottom of Bowery. So it's where East Broadway, Bowery turns into St. James, which comes down to where we are now. That intersection, I think, is physically a bit of a mess, but also a hub between all these neighborhoods. And there's one plot in particular that is right now, it's a pizza shop that every day I come out the door of the building, I was like, one day that's going to be a really interesting building, basically, whether it's a museum or whatever it is, but that feels like it would be a really iconic place in Chinatown. In terms of newer or kind of renovating, I don't actually know if I think of a difference. I'm trying to think of how basically in New York, most of it's working with an existing stock. Half the time because the stock's actually really interesting. Half the time because it's just cheaper to basically use what's there. So I'm really used to, I think, working within an existing context, especially in a neighborhood where there's a lot of really interesting history. It's harder to recreate that history when you're building new than it is to kind of build off of something that's already there. Then there's places where you're going to like, oh, there's nothing here, to be honest. So there's no existing to retain.
Let's create a new history.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then you always have landmarks.
Yeah,
right? They
I feel like we're always trying to create landmarks anyway.
Yeah.
It's just whether it's new or transforming something that people had seen before.
Totally. So we do this segment called Rocket Round.
Okay.
It's meant to be quick form. You're allowed unlimited passes here. I was watching.
Should I do really fast answers?
You could do. You have a great perspective. It doesn't have to be fast answers. Rock Around stems from an idea we had as a podcast. So that was the genesis. All right, you ready?
Sure.
Okay. First thing you do in the morning.
Probably go to the bathroom.
Second thing.
I go to the bathroom.
Number 2.
I'll make my fiance a coffee.
Favorite material to design with?
Oh, that's a good question. Glass. Especially when it's kind of weird and shaped and has a really funny textures to it.
Least favorite material to work with?
Plastics.
Most underrated architectural element?
Most underrated architectural. I'm going to go with the baseboard of a wall.
Need nice baseboards.
I feel like it tells you really quickly what the quality of the design is, depending what the baseboard is.
Favorite building in New York City?
In New York, it's kind of boring, but it's probably still the old Whitney building, the Breuer one, which I think is a Sotheby's or something. That one I feel like every time I visit just still grows on me.
Soundtrack that gets you into flow? Or artist? Or music genre? I'll give you flexibility on this one.
So one of them is this band called Sea and Cake, which is like an old Chicago band. And I think it's because for whatever reason, when I was in school, that band basically represented like calm, sunny days to me. Like it was the most peaceful version of music. And so now when I listen to it, it still kind of like automatically resets any kind of anxiety. It resets into like a really like calm, flowy state. But I have to use it really specifically because if I overuse it, like I try to save it for like, okay, this is a moment where I can actually turn on this one specific album. And
you could always hand it off to your team.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Have them listen to it. A creative person who inspires you?
I was gonna say my fiance, but let me try to think of someone that's not as. She is kind of amazing. We'll try to get her on this.
Yeah.
Podcast.
What does your fiance do?
So she does nails.
Yep.
I think the reason I'm so inspired by her is because she creates a new finished product every like 2 hours, and my work takes 2 years minimum. So and she's just constantly like turning out ideas and making them and finishing them, and someone leaves happy. I can't think of many other mediums that work that fast.
Maybe that's the theme to your wedding. 2 hours
Super
versus
fast.
2
We're
years.
done.
2 hours and 2 years.
Yeah. Hopefully more than 2 years.
Going into it. Ahead of the marriage. Marriage is forever. How about a one-line definition of what good architecture is?
It has a Jesus moment.
Most common misconception about architects?
That we know how to build anything. We don't.
Well, if you weren't an architect and you weren't a builder, what would you be doing?
If I was better at surfing than I'd have ever been, I'd want to be a pro surfer. That was what I thought I was going to be growing up. Very quickly realized I was not nearly good enough. Still tried to do it, ish, like tried to stay around San Diego where I grew up, but very quickly realized that was not a very smart life move.
Best advice you've ever received in business?
Recently, actually, someone, which was really helpful, basically behave like the expert that you are.
When do you know that a project is done?
It's never really done. When the when the when the when the opening, actually, even when the opening party happens, it's not really done. When you stop getting paid, no, that's not really it either. It's never really done.
Okay, last one, Aaron. You could come back to it because
Sure.
you don't have to. One word you hope people use to describe your work.
Joyous.
What would advice you'd give? What's advice you would give to someone that's starting out in New York City?
The how you start your work, and that includes both your practice and any kind of design move you're doing for a project, oftentimes is how you'll end it. So like in the actual design stuff, it's like if you start with, I'm gonna be really generic, but if you start with a circular building, you end up finding ways of moving away from the circular building, but you end up with a kind of version of that. It's rare that you start at A and end up at a totally different place. And I think that's true from a practice point of view, seeing how my practice formed, but also seeing how other people's practice, where they did really practical work. Obviously, it's classic. For example, you're doing bathrooms as a remodel and you kind of get stuck in this lane. So even if it's harder to try to put out the kind of work you want to do from day one, which I feel like I did to a certain extent. But it is like you just kind of get in a lane at some point. So try to establish what that lane
We
is
will
right
have
away.
some form of swimming in the East River.
We'll have
to
some
that
form of
point.
swimming, yeah.
Mark it. We have hopefully in less than another 15 years.
Hopefully in
right?
less than another 15 years. Hopefully it's
Both
my
of
project.
our kids could swim together
Yeah,
in the East
exactly.
River. Dong, thank you. This is
Thank you.
great. I appreciate
Sure.
you making the time.
Thanks.